Never stop to wonder when watching my TV why we who do the work are so seldom seen.
Now I'm wondering why we're blacked out or portrayed as troublemakers, or always in the background when on screen. Working TV, now we're on screen. Working TV.
Today in freedom's cause and raise our voices high. We'll join our hands in union strong to battle or to die. Hold the fort, for we are coming. Union hearts be strong. Side by side we'll battle.
To commemorate the 75th anniversary of the historic On to Ottawa trek. We're here at Crab Park. Specifically, we chose this location because the railway tracks right beside the park mark the very spot where the trek began, where 1,200 young unemployed men boarded atop the CPR rail boxcars on June 3rd, 1935, to take their plea for work and wages on to Ottawa. Sadly, the poverty, unemployment, and homelessness that existed in 1935 are still very much with us today. So we're also here to send off a group of 2010 trekkers who are going to be leaving tonight from the train station to go to Ottawa and take their plea for a national housing strategy to Ottawa. And you'll note the red tents that are around the park today. Those tents are also going to be taken to Ottawa and trying to nationalize the Red Tent program. So I'm also proud to say that our fundraising has been very successful, and successful enough that we are able to sponsor 3 people from the homelessness advocate community to be part of that delegation going tonight. And the plaque that we are unveiling today will be installed tomorrow on the overpass that connects this park to Main Street. And then when you look down from that plaque, you will be looking directly onto the railway line where the trek began.
Creator, we offer our thanks for the abundance that have been provided for us today. Our gratitude goes out to the trekkers for changing our society and our nation. We honor all those that went before us, those that struggled for the right to work for fair wages and the right to work with honor. We thank you. Our prayers go out to the men, women, and children who lived through the Great Depression, for the many lessons they passed down to us. We honor their struggles and their will to survive. Creator, our blessings to those men that had the courage to change our country, and to those that continue to fight for social justice. Creator, bless each and every person here today, all my relations.
From the Office of the Mayor, City of Vancouver, a day to honor the heritage of the 1935 On to Ottawa trek. Whereas the 1935 On to Ottawa trek was a defining moment in Canada's social history, departing from Vancouver on June the 3rd of that year after young, single, unemployed men had campaigned in the city for both civic relief and for work and wages in response to the desperate conditions of Canada's depression. And whereas the civic authorities of the day responded to the campaign with repressive measures, including the reading of the Riot Act to disperse the protests. And whereas the problems of poverty, homelessness, low wages, and unemployment in our society are concerns requiring progressive social response rather than an attempt to stifle expression and liberty. And whereas the 75th anniversary of the On to Ottawa trek will be commemorated in this city on June the 6th, 2010, to honor the trek and the memory of those who participated in it, contributing to the heritage of social movements seeking to make needed change in our city and in the larger society. Now I, therefore, Tim Stevenson, on behalf of Gregor Robertson, Mayor of the City of Vancouver, do hereby proclaim June the 6th, 2010, as a day to honor the heritage of the 1935 On to Ottawa trek, sealed in the City of Vancouver.
Our next speaker is one who is known, I think, to everybody here. Libby Davies is the Member of Parliament for Vancouver East, and she's been an institution in this part of Vancouver and across the country.
It's pretty special to be here today, and when I look around the crowd today and see the folks that I know, some real heroes in our community, just to see Frank Kennedy here, former president of the Vancouver District Labour Council, Dave Barrett. I mean, just the folks who are here today. This is history, and I feel very proud to be in this particular space. And I just want to say something about Crab Park before I talk about the trek, because, you know, this neighborhood, the downtown east side, that used to be called Skid Road. So when in 1935, when the trekkers got on those boxcars, it was still Skid Road then. But many decades later, it was residents in this neighborhood who determined to assert their rights and to stand up and to say we have a voice and we have power, and this is a community and this is a neighborhood, and we're going to make sure that it's not Skid Road, known as Skid Road, but it's known as the downtown east side. And in this very place here, Crab Park, even to claim this green space was a struggle that took many, many years. Don Larson and many others. I remember the camp out that happened just in this space to convince the Port of Vancouver, the federal government, and the park board to turn this into a park, because, as you know, we have miles and miles of beautiful green space on the west side, and you come to the east side and yeah, you know, we have the working port, and that's very important to jobs and our economy, but we also need to have green space where people can live and breathe and feel grass and have trees. And so the struggle just to get Crab Park was a momentous issue in the downtown east side and took many, many years. And since that time, this small part of Vancouver, and a lot of people don't even know that this park is here, this part of Vancouver, Crab Park, has become now the site of many community activities and activism. I mean, there's a memorial to the missing women. There have been many processions through this park. And when I think about it, you know, I don't see today as a downer. I don't see today as something, you know, I mean, what happened on the On to Ottawa trek and the brutality that was experienced was terrible, and we remember that, and we remember the people, the workers who were put in those relief camps and treated so badly. But what we're here to remember, what we're here to claim and to bring forward into our modern day age is the struggle that took place. The fact that thousands of people said we're not going to put up with this anymore. We're going to take on the government of the day, R.C. Bennett. We're going to say that we have rights. Now we call them human rights. We have labor rights. We have the right to live, to decent wages, to dignity, to respect. And so when you think about that struggle and what it meant and what the effort was, the collective effort, I think that is so much an important part of Canadian history. And unfortunately, we don't hear enough about it. And so the fact that we're here today, 75 years later, to claim that history and to bring it forward, particularly in this neighborhood, in this part of the city, with a plaque that will be unveiled shortly, to me is something that is affirming, it's inspiring, and it shows the solidarity of people, whether they're unemployed, they're working, they're allies, the labor movement, the community activists, and that's still going on today. You know, we see the red tents here, the red tent campaign that was so visible during the Olympics. And so I think the legacy that's here today, the memory of those workers and what they did and what they took on in terms of the establishment, and they refused to be silent, is the fact that they did produce a legacy of social programs in this country. And so today we have a challenge to take up that legacy and to move it forward and to say, still in this society, the gap between poverty and wealth is growing. And to think that in a city as wealthy as Vancouver, there are people who are destitute, there are people who can't even get access to employment insurance, there are people who are unemployed, there are people who are on the street, there are people who are homeless, there are people living in poverty. That is not tolerable. And so we take up this call for housing, we take up this call for decent wages, we take up this call to be together with one another in a sense of unity. So I feel very empowered to be here today, to feel the weight of that history behind us so many decades, and to know that it's real and that we bring it forward, and it inspires us now to take on these new challenges. So thank you so much, especially to those who are here today who did participate in 1935, and to the labor leaders who over the years have kept this struggle going, and most of all to the Historical Society. You guys have done an unbelievable job in bringing this together so that we can all share collectively in the history that we have. So thank you very much for being here today.
When Slim Evans stood in the place right over there, and they were having a meeting talking about what they should do next, and he said, "On to Ottawa," he set in motion a journey that would truly change the course of history in Canada. There were thousands of desperate young men who had decided long before that day to leave to do something about their lives. They had decided, in fact, that they were going to go on strike. The On to Ottawa trek was the final chapter in a year or two long organizing campaign in relief camps across Canada, not just in British Columbia. And when they walked off the job in April, they came from all over the province, and some of them came from as far away as Alberta, to come to Vancouver to seek justice. Their demands were simple. The slogan, work and wages. The details, they wanted 50 cents a day instead of 20 cents a day. They wanted to be treated fairly because in the work camps, even though they were working, they were not covered by Workers' Compensation Board. They had no compensation coverage. If they were injured, it was too bad. They wanted something even more basic. They wanted first aid equipment in those camps, and there were none. It was also a democratic struggle because part of the move by the government to attack the unemployed was when you went to the relief camp and you were forced there and often taken there by the police, you lost your right to vote. You were no longer a citizen in the eyes of the government of Canada. And they were demanding, of course, that they get the right to vote back. They marched in the streets, they were disciplined, they held demonstrations, and the thing that was so important was the people of Vancouver supported them. Even if the mayor didn't, I can tell you the people did. And it was actually the sit-in at the Carnegie Center where McGeer had to actually come down and negotiate and gave them 2 days of relief pay for money for food. And when the police were preparing to go in there and take them over and kick them out physically, the leader of the Longshoremen's Union came up. And he went to the police and said, if you go in there and you do that, then no one's working on these docks tonight because we're bringing 1,500 people here to stop you from doing that. And the police actually thought it was a good idea that maybe they shouldn't go in and do that. So they did it, and those people marched out of there victorious and had a massive demonstration of the people and their supporters outside. They were successful. Some would suggest that they weren't. They were absolutely successful. And I know we'll be successful at the day that when every human being and every Canadian who walks in and finds himself unfortunately unemployed and goes and gets unemployment insurance, they should be thinking about these people. Because it was these people that put it on the political agenda. No, they didn't get it the next year or the year after. It became a huge legal problem. But by the 40s, we got unemployment insurance. And it was a direct result of actions like this one going to Ottawa and putting that on the political agenda. Now here's another little message for Stephen Harper if he doesn't get the message properly yet. The other thing that happened, of course, was that Bennett was defeated in the next election. In fact, the Conservatives were crushed across the country. And you know, it was a fitting end to that, and those trekkers deserve a lot of the credit for making sure that Canadians understood and knew what was happening to unemployed people, and they punished the government for trying to punish those people. And today, they're doing the same thing. Being unemployed is still a crime in this society. Being unemployed is still a disaster in this society. That unemployment scheme that those people fought for used to cover almost everybody, and now simply covers less than 50%. Those things need to be changed. And they're still blaming people, like they blamed the trekkers, like they called them communists. Some of them were, by the way. Like they called them indecent people, took away their right to vote. All of those things were really about blaming them for the crisis. Why wouldn't they raise the wages? Because they said business couldn't afford to pay it. And what do we hear today? The same thing. It's our fault. The crisis is here. So what they did by rejecting the blame, by demanding to be treated by human beings, is fundamental to the things that we stand up for today and continue to fight for today. It's a wonderful legacy. I'm happy to be part of sending off a delegation of new trekkers going to Ottawa to say in so many words that having a home is a human right, that housing is a right, and that it is a national disgrace to have the homelessness that we have in this city and in this country. I hope he gives you the hospitality by inviting you to his publicly owned house that the Canadian people pay for, and maybe invites you in and feeds you some of that food that the Canadian people pay for so he can be fed. You know, Mr. Harper, you live in public housing. You live in public housing, Mr. Harper, and your only crime is that everybody in this country should also have a house, and if it has to be public, so be it, that everybody else should have the same right, Mr. Harper. So that when you go to bed tonight, Mr. Harper, you think about inviting these folks to your house that we all own, and you think about what you're going to do by implementing a national housing policy, the 1% housing policy, because Canadians will pay for it. Cut the taxes to corporations, build the houses, and let's remember that it's struggle, and struggle that makes this world what it is today. And let's keep up that struggle, and thank you again to everybody who's here today, and thank you to those trekkers for keeping that spirit alive. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Johal, and is the chairperson of the Impact on Communities Coalition, who were very active during the Olympics, and coordinated the 2010 Homelessness Hunger Strike Relay, where he convinced people to take a whole week at a time where they went on a hunger strike one at a time, and is still continuing. So he's also going to be on the train tonight leading the delegation to Ottawa. Johal.
And I want to echo what Libby and Jim were talking about. You know, we really, here in the downtown east side and the east side of Vancouver, we stand on the shoulders of social movements that came before us. If you look back at the history of Vancouver, before it was even incorporated at the city, right in the shores of what is today Crab Park was an Aboriginal village. And today that fight for social justice and land claims and redress goes on. In 1907, people marched down Pender Street and broke the windows in Chinatown. And for many, many years, people fought to get rid of the head tax and all of the discriminatory legislation against the Chinese community. In 1935, about the same time as the On to Ottawa trek, a few blocks east of here, there was a 3-hour battle between longshoremen and the police called the Battle of Ballantine Pier. So that fight for justice and wages continues. During the Second World War, just a few blocks from here, the Japanese community was interned right here, and that fight for justice and redress continued for many, many decades. When government tried to push a highway through the heart of Strathcona, the community rose up and said no. In the 90s, when people were overdosing, people were pushing for harm reduction. the front pages of the paper used to say, "Junkies want a shooting gallery," and this community rose up and said, this is a health and human rights issue. So we say clearly today that if we can spend $1 billion for Olympic security, if they can spend $1 billion for security for the G8 and G20, we can spend $1 billion for social housing in Canada. Today I want to thank someone who couldn't be with us today, Cecily Nicholson, who's the Administrative Director of the Downtown Eastside Women's Center, just went the last 7 days without eating on a liquid diet. It's the 75th week someone did this quietly across this city with very little media attention or interest from the papers. And so it didn't matter to us because people volunteered and wanted to raise and push this amongst their own circles of friends. That's how we've organized all through the Olympic period when no one was listening about pushing for the social commitments. This community continued. And today when we get on the trains with our trekkers, Sean Millar from the Portland Hotel Society, Dave Murray from the Carnegie Community Action Project, Diana Hart from the Purple Thistle Center. We have a couple of people going from the Lookout Emergency Aid Shelter, and I'm forgetting a couple of people as well. But once we get on the trains, we're going to be discussing what we do in Toronto and Ottawa. We have meetings set up with housing organizations, and you see the red tents that were donated to us from the Pivot Legal Society. We're going to be leaving them with housing groups in Toronto, and we're going to be taking more to Ottawa for the lawn of Parliament Hill. And so let the message be loud and clear from British Columbia Prime Minister Stephen Harper. Let it be loud and clear. Either you and your caucus support a national housing program, or we will throw you out of office. And when we get back from Ottawa, hold the fort because the fight goes on. Thank you.
Working on the anniversary this spring, it has really been our great good fortune to get to know two amazing men, two veterans of the Trek, who are both about 94 years old and who tell the story like it was yesterday.
I left my home in Blueberry Mountain in northern Alberta on April the 1st, 1934. I was 17 then. Blueberry Mountain had lost its first boy to starvation, red lines, flop houses, soup kitchens, hopelessness, and despair that led to years in relief camps, riots, and ultimately prison. I worked in relief camps in BC, and in the spring of 1935, I found myself on the prairies. Everywhere in the streets of Winnipeg, one can look overhear the talk of the On to Ottawa movement. The last factor was like a magnet that drew us all together. Adventure. Pictures of freight trains loaded with young men heading east blazed in the papers on the Winnipeg streets. I hurried to the exhibition grounds on the north side and joined. As the On to Ottawa Trek freights moved east throughout BC and Alberta, every stop added more men to the rising tide of dislike and even hate of the Bennett government. But it too was beginning to move all the police it could muster west. Regina became the focal point. Here in this prairie city, the movement was to be halted. The idea of a trainload of men, perhaps 2,000, joining forces with another 1,500 in Winnipeg, and all proceeding east to Ottawa became unthinkable to the authorities. And as we know that Dominion Day, the Trek was attacked and disbanded by the police in Regina. But it did not end there. In Winnipeg, we prepare to become the head end of the movement. A tag day had been held and the public had been generous. We cannot use the freights. The police are determined to keep us out of all the railroad yards. Our leaders switched tactics and rent about 30 old buses. But we were in for a real surprise when we arrived at the Manitoba-Ontario border. There the ride ended. The buses slowed and then stopped. Their contract was fulfilled, the drivers said, and besides, they were not licensed to operate in Ontario. In a moment, we were dumped out in the bush, at least 35 miles from Kenora. About noon the next day, They did arrive in Kenora, a river of men flowing east in a movement that was to end in this tiny village as the federal authorities built a dam of steel-helmeted armed police to protect themselves from the embarrassment of explaining they had no solution for the Canadian unemployed except the rumored sandbag gun nests set up along the train exits out of the village. So the trek ended, but the memory of it has never passed. I want to leave this message for my family and their descendants for generations to come. Always learn throughout your lives and remember, my old theory, it'll always look better in the morning. Thank you.
We have thought for some time that what Vancouver needs is some permanent memory, an official recognition of the role that the On to Ottawa trek played in our society. We thought that the 75th anniversary would be a good time to do that. We proposed to Port Metro Vancouver that on the overpass, which overlooks the very place where the trek started, the CPR tracks at the north foot of Main Street, that there be a bronze memorial erected that will permanently recognize the importance and the sacrifices of the trek and the trekkers.
I think it is just absolutely awesome that today there'll be folks getting back on that train, going back to Ottawa, another trek, and saying that housing is a human right, and that this country has to have a national housing program.
Hold the fort, for we are coming. Union hearts be strong.
The original trek is such an inspiring moment in Canadian history that for us, to tie together with the things that people were pushing for then to what's happening right now. You know, things have changed, but in a lot of ways things haven't changed. And we need to reignite people's political fires, and sometimes history is one of the most burning examples of the ways to do that.